There is more if you want it.
You sure about this?
The bowl of noodles sat on the counter, a small island of steam in the rough sea of the Redemption Gulch saloon. From her kitchen, May could see the men at the tables, their faces red from sun and whiskey, their voices a low rumble of boasts and complaints. For an hour the noodles had waited. The broth, shiny with savory promise, was now getting a film on it. The pieces of chicken were sinking, and the fresh scallions she'd carefully sprinkled on top were starting to wilt. This was the night she'd made a dish from her home, and the third night it had gone untouched. Jediah Thorne, the saloon's owner, had called it an experiment. Give the men something, he'd said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. A novelty. The miners and ranch hands of Redemption Gulch, Nevada, did not want novelty. They wanted steak, stale bread, and potatoes boiled until they were soft. They wanted food that tasted like the dirt they worked in all day. They did not want the clean flavors of a world they couldn't imagine and didn't care to. May was a ghost in this place, a 25-year widow, bound by a debt her husband had left behind when his lungs gave out on the railroad grade. Thorne had taken her on as a cook, a position that sounded like a mercy, felt like a cage. She moved silently between the stove and the chopping block, a figure in a plain grey dress, the high collar, a stark contrast to the grime of the kitchen. The men saw her. They didn't. She was a fixture like the mirror behind the bar or the permanent stain on the floor where a man had bled out last winter. They ignored her. They ignored her food. Her presence was a constant reminder of the Chinese crews that had laid the tracks to this town and then been run out when the work was done. She reached for the bowl, her fingers tracing the rim. It was a waste of ingredients she'd traded for, with the freight driver giving him some of her specialty in exchange for a few precious vegetables. She would eat the noodles herself after the saloon closed, and the last drunk had been pushed out into the dusty street. It was a ritual of disappointment. However, just as her hand closed around the bowl, the saloon door swung open, admitting a slice of the late summer sun and a man who seemed to wear the trail itself. He was not large. He moved with a stillness that drew the eye. His hat was battered, his clothes coated in a red dust, but his boots were well kept. He walked past the loud card game, bypassed the bar, his gaze sweeping the room with a calm, assessing quality that was unusual. The other men drank to forget the day. This one looked like he was committing it to memory. His eyes, the color of denim, settled on the counter. They settled on the bowl of noodles. He stopped, his back to the rest of the room. May froze, her hands on the bowl. He was looking at the food, not through it, not past it, but at it. He turned his head slightly, not towards the barman, towards the small shadowed opening of her kitchen. Is that for anyone? He asked. His voice was low, carried a dry rasp, the sound of too much dust and not enough water. The noise in the saloon seemed to dip, a lull as a few men noticed the strange interaction. Thorne, who had been polishing a glass at the end of the bar, straightened up. Just the cook's own meal, friend, Thorne called out, his tone slick and dismissive. I've got beef steak, it's tough, it fills the gut. The stranger didn't look at Thorne. His eyes remained on the kitchen opening, on the sliver of May's face in the shadows. Looks better than beef steak, he said, his voice quiet but clear. He took a step closer to the counter. I'll have that. A chuckle rippled through a table. Careful there, mister, one of the miners joked. You don't know what's in that. May felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up her neck. She wanted to snatch the bowl to hide it and herself, but the stranger's gaze held her. It wasn't pitying or curious. It was simple, direct and serious, as if he were conducting a business transaction of importance. Thorne set the glass down with a click. The man wants steak, he announced, overriding the stranger's request. My patrons prefer food. The stranger finally turned to face Thorne. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I am an American, he said, the words falling into the quiet. I asked for the noodles. He placed $1 on the counter of the pass-through. The coin shone bright and clean against the greasy wood. Will that cover it? He asked, his eyes on May. May looked from the coin to the man's face, then to Thorne, whose jaw was tight with irritation. No one had ever directly challenged Thorne in his establishment over something so trivial. It wasn't trivial. It was a line being drawn in the dust. She was standing on one side of it. For the time in months, someone was waiting for her to make a choice. With a small trembling breath, she slid the bowl of noodles across the counter. The man, who the town would come to know as Arthur Bishop, picked up the bowl. He ignored the stares and the murmurs that followed him as he took a seat at an empty table in the corner, his back to the wall. He picked up the chopsticks she had placed beside the bowl, his movements surprisingly deft. The saloon watched as he lifted the strands of noodles to his lips. He chewed slowly, deliberately. A long moment passed, then he took another bite and another. He ate the bowl down to the last drop of broth, his focus absolute. When he was finished, he set the bowl down, placed the chopsticks neatly across the top, and met May's gaze through the pass-through. He gave a slow nod. It was not a gesture of charity. It was a gesture of respect. That single nod was like a stone dropped into a murky pond. The knight, a grizzled old prospector, emboldened by Arthur's precedent, shyly asked if he could try some of that Chinese soup. May's hands shook as she prepared it. This time the bowl didn't sit waiting. It was consumed with a grunt of satisfaction. The night after that, 2 cattle drivers, tired of their trail cooking, ordered a plate of the dumplings she'd been hesitant to even make. A strange shift was occurring. Arthur Bishop had become a fixture at his corner table, ordering a different dish from her every evening. He never said much. His presence was a shield. The other men, seeing that a man steady and self-possessed as Arthur enjoyed the food, began to let their curiosity outweigh their prejudice. The orders for her cooking started as a trickle, then became a stream. The scent of ginger and star anise began to mingle with the odors of beer and unwashed bodies. For the time, May had to buy ingredients in bulk. Jedediah Thorne watched this transformation with a curdled expression. He was making money, but the saloon was no longer entirely his. The center of gravity was shifting from his bar to her kitchen. The men still drank his whiskey. Now they talked about her food. He started making small cutting remarks enough for her to hear. "Get used to it," he'd mutter as he passed the kitchen. Fads die out. One afternoon the freight wagon was late. May found herself without the chicken she needed for the evening's most requested dish. Panic tightened her chest. To fail now when she was just gaining a foothold felt like a catastrophe. She saw Thorne speaking with the wagon driver when he finally arrived. A tense, low conversation. When the driver approached her, his face was apologetic. "Sorry, ma'am," he mumbled, not meeting her eye. Mr. Thorne bought up all the poultry, said he had an event. There was no event, May knew it. She looked over at Thorne, who was watching her, a smug little smile playing on his lips. He was trying to break her momentum, to starve her of supplies and force the men back to his stake. It was a cruel display of power. Her heart sank. She had nothing to offer tonight but plain rice and broth. The men would be disappointed, their fragile trust broken. Just as despair began to settle, Arthur Bishop walked in earlier than usual. He took one look at her face, visible through the pass-through, seemed to understand immediately. He walked to the bar where Thorne was standing. "Jedediah," Arthur said, his voice, "I hear you've cornered the market on chicken." Thorne puffed out his chest. "A man has to take care of his customers." "Funny," Arthur said. He did not look away. "It seems to me you are taking care of yourself. Those men are not here for your steak anymore. They are here for hers." He nodded towards the kitchen. "You are a businessman, Thorne. This is not business. I decide what is business in my saloon," Thorne said, his nice behavior finally ending. "Do you?" Arthur asked quietly. He turned to face the men who had come in for dinner. "Boys," he called out, his voice loud in the room. "Mr. Thorne here has decided you will eat steak tonight. He has bought all the chicken for himself." The men all groaned. One man, a blacksmith named Peterson, hit his hand on a table. "The hell he has. I was looking forward to those noodles." "Me too," another man said. "I am sick of steak." Thorne's face changed from white to red. He was being questioned in front of everyone, his authority being challenged. He looked at the faces of his customers and then at Arthur's calm face. He had made a mistake thinking the men liked him more than they liked food. Defeated, he spat on the floor. "Fine," he said angrily. "Take the chickens." He walked into the back room. A moment later, a box of chickens appeared on the floor by the kitchen door. May watched, her heart beating fast. Arthur had not done anything. He had not said anything mean. He had just shown Thorne what he was like, and the whole saloon had seen it. He had given her a voice by making the men like her. When she looked at Thorne's back, she saw he was very angry with her. The problem with the chickens was solved. She did not know that the fight over the chickens was just the start, and Thorne was angrier than just about business. What she thought was a job was actually a trap, and the papers she had signed were not a contract but a chain. That night, after all the customers had left, and the saloon was dark and quiet, May was cleaning the stove, her arms hurting. The smell of bleach and old grease filled the kitchen. The win over the chickens did not feel good now, replaced by a feeling of worry. Thorne had been too quiet for the rest of the night, a silence that felt more scary than his anger. There was a knock at the kitchen's back door, the one that led to the alley. May was startled, holding the scrub brush like a weapon. "Who is it?" she whispered. "It's Arthur Bishop," came the low voice. "May, I need to talk to you." She hesitated. It was not right for a man to visit a widow at this hour, but he had helped her. She opened the door a little. He stood in the moonlight, his hat in his hands. He was not looking at her with desire or pity. With the same serious face he had shown that first day. "I do not mean to bother you," he said. "I saw Thorne's face earlier. He is not a man who forgets when someone does something to him. I am worried about you." "He will find another way," May said, her voice barely heard. It was a fact. "He has some kind of power over you, does he? More than your pay?" It was not really a question. May looked down at the floor. To say the truth felt like another humiliation. Arthur's calm behavior gave her a little courage. She nodded. "My husband," she began, the words feeling hard to say. "He was sick from working on the railroad. Mr. Thorne gave us money for the doctor." Arthur said, "Yes, when he died I had no money. Mr. Thorne said I would work to pay him back. He had me sign a paper." Arthur became still. "This paper, do you have it?" She went to a loose floorboard under her bed in the tiny room next door. From the space she got a folded yellow paper and a small leather book. It was her husband's, filled with characters she could not read. She could only speak her dialect. She did not know how to read. She gave the paper to Arthur. He unfolded it carefully under the light of her lantern. His face showed he was angry. The silence went unbroken by the sounds of crickets in the alley. May, he said finally, his voice tight with anger. Can you read English? She shook her head. A little, not words like these. This isn't a work agreement, he said, his voice low and grim. He didn't just give you a job to pay off a loan. According to this, you are his indentured servant. The debt adds up with interest every month at a rate that's against the law in any organized territory. You can't leave. You can't work for anyone. Based on these terms, you'll never be free. You'll owe him for the rest of your life. The words hit her like a blow. She had known it was bad. She hadn't understood how bad. She had believed that with work she could earn her way out. Now she saw the truth. The hole was bottomless. Thorne hadn't offered her a job, he had bought her. Arthur picked up a book and opened it. His eyes scanned the columns of writing. What is this? He asked. My husband's, she said. He kept accounts for his work crew. Arthur's expression changed. He pointed to a symbol next to a series of dates and sums. What does this symbol mean? It means Thorne, she said. A heavy boot scraped on the boardwalk, followed by a loud banging on the saloon's main doors. May, open up, a voice called. Thorne wants this place cleared out now. It was Marcus Heller, the town constable. Panic seized May. They were coming for her. You don't have to run, Arthur said. He has a piece of paper. You have the truth, and now you have a witness. He looked her directly in the eye. What do you want to do? She thought of the men enjoying her food, of Arthur's nod of respect, of the feel of an honest coin in her hand. It was a taste of a life she now refused to surrender. She lifted her chin. I stay, she said. Her voice was firm. This is my kitchen. Thorne stood there flanked by Heller. His face was a mask of rage. Your kitchen, he sneered. You own nothing. You are nothing but an asset on my books. Heller took a step forward. Arthur moved to stand between them. Not touch her, Arthur said. Heller laughed. Who are you to stop me, drifter? Arthur said, his voice ringing with authority. I'm a man who knows what a fraudulent contract looks like. I'm a man who can read a ledger. U.S. Marshal was due in Redemption Gulch on the Weekly Express. I imagine he'd be very interested to hear about a saloon owner who's been defrauding the Central Pacific Railroad and keeping a woman in servitude. For a moment no one moved. The kitchen was a tinder box of hate, fear, and defiance. Thorne looked from Arthur's face to May's terrified but resolute one. He had lost control. His power, built on intimidation and deceit, was dissolving in the light of a damning truth. With a roar of frustration, Thorne turned. This isn't over, he spat. He and Heller stormed out, slamming the door behind them. May leaned against the stove, her legs threatening to give out. She had stood her ground. She had won. 4 months later, a new building stood on a lot just off the main street. A simple hand-painted sign swung gently in the breeze. May's Noodle House. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the aroma of simmering broth and savory spices. Every one of the 6 tables was full. At the counter, taking coin and making change, stood Arthur Bishop. May moved through the efficient kitchen, a space she had designed herself. She was not a ghost here. She was the heart of the enterprise. The U.S. Marshal had arrived as scheduled. Arthur presented the case with logic. The fraudulent contract was invalidated on the spot. Faced with the ledger and the threat of an investigation, Jedediah Thorne had crumbled. The Central Pacific had paid May a settlement for her husband's death and the wages Thorne had stolen. It was enough to buy the lot and build her business. Arthur had stayed. He managed the books fairly, handled the customers, his steady presence a guarantee of order and respect. They were partners in business and in an understanding that was slowly building between them. May brought a bowl of noodles from the kitchen. She placed it in front of a ranch hand who looked up at her with a grateful smile. Thank you, ma'am, he said. She looked around the room at the tables, at the faces of the people who had once ignored her. They had not just accepted her, they had made a place for her. Redemption Gulch had in its rough way lived up to its name. Her gaze met Arthur's across the room. He gave her that same slow nod he had on the very first night, of respect, a promise kept. The bowl she had just served was like the one that had sat cold and rejected on the saloon pass-through months ago. Everything else was different now. It was no longer a sign of her being alone. Proof that sometimes all it takes is one person to take a chance to really see what others won't, and that can change a life forever. That brings us to the end of this story. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because people like you take the time to listen. If you liked what you heard, you can hit that like button. If you want more stories from the old frontier, you should subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself and thanks again for being.